So I'd like to welcome today our first speaker, and that is John Lindley from the South Stoke Wildlife and Conservation Group. And John is going to talk to us today about how iRecord is being used by a local wildlife group. So we're really looking at that local group perspective to begin with before we move on to more regional and national views. So John, I can't wait to hear your talk, so I'm going to shut up and I'm going to hand over to you.
Great, thank you very much indeed. So, as we've already alluded to, the South Stoke Wildlife Group is a very small group in a very small village in South Oxfordshire. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself before I get into it. I'll be very brief. So I'm very much an amateur entomologist, always been interested in insects and also always been interested in photography. So combining the two together to start making a record of local insects has been something that has been of interest to me. And moving forward, what I decided to do and a group of us decided to do locally was to form a little group to, if you like, share our interests and see if we could get a bit of a picture about what's going on locally with our wildlife and what's going on locally in terms of interest in wildlife and biodiversity. So we are at the moment, we're a group of about 7 people involved in the organisation. We've been running a bit less than 2 years. We are a registered charity, which helps us in terms of doing small-scale fundraising and also helps us just in terms of the logistics and running of the group. So the photograph that we see here is just us doing one of our activities. This was a hedge planting project. I'll come back to some of the things that we do in a little bit more detail later on. So I just wanted to touch on what are the aims of us in our little group. And really the aims fall into two areas. The first is wildlife centric, which is to discover what we've got in the village and to monitor what we've got and to see if we can, if you like, see if we can monitor changes in distribution or abundance, or see if we can pick up on influences from climate change. The other thing that we want to do really is to engage people in the village and in the surrounding area with what we're trying to do. So encourage people to either expand their current interests or to become interested if they're not. And to that end, we run a number of events locally. We do hedge planting. We're creating and improving a number of road verges in the village for wildflowers. We've got a no-mow initiative that's going on in the village. We've got a village initiative to try and get an orchard planted and maintained. So we've got a range of things that we're trying to do to improve our environment. But the basis of what we're trying to do in terms of recording things is to try to use iRecord as our main repository for everything that we see, everything that we record, so that we've got all of our data and all of our backlog of information in one place so that we can go to that information and refer to it whenever we want to. So in the 2 years or a bit less than 2 years since we've been set up and monitoring things on iRecord, and just to point out this little area here, this is the parish of South Stoke defined by this blue line. So we can see here that we've had nearly 3,000 records on iRecord of over 1,000 species. we think it's important to get photos of any records that we capture. And in addition to those of us who are actively involved in our group, we also, within our little activity, our iRecord activity, we're able to see records from anybody who has recorded anything within our parish. So you can see that the records largely follow here the River Thames, or here follow the railway line. This part of the village over here is largely agricultural, so there are fewer records over here. But this area over here and to the north of the parish is a good area for us to see brown hares, and that's why some of these records are 1 kilometre squares, because people are sensitive to and cognizant of the risks that we face locally from hare courses. So we don't record brown hares to any significant degree of accuracy, because we don't want people to know where they might be. But for a small group, we think we're off to a pretty good start with the number of species and the number of records that we've got. So just having a quick look at the breakdown of the records, you can see that nearly everything is either invertebrates or flowering plants here, or I think we've got birds here, but the vast majority of records are for invertebrates, so insects, crustaceans, millipedes, etc., spiders. So moving on to how we gather data. Now, one of the things that I alluded to a little earlier on is that we're very interested in involving people from the village and from surrounding areas in helping us to gather data. So we run things like dragonfly walks, bat recording sessions. We do regular wildflower walks pretty much every week in the season. We've got more activities to come. And what we do is we publicise these activities within the village on our little village newsletter. We've got a Facebook group that we publicise on. And generally speaking, we get anywhere between 6 and 20 people rocking up for our activities. This picture here shows us doing a dragonfly recording session in a really good piece of habitat that we have in the village. This was at the end of May last year. We're very lucky to be able to use this area, and indeed we're very lucky throughout the village that a number of landowners enable us to go onto their land to record and to identify species. So we're off to a good start with the activities that we're running. We always want to do more, and we're going to come back to some of our future aims that we're going to touch on a bit later in the talk. There are some other means of, pardon me, of data recording which are more individual in their approach. So I'm running a regular moth trap in the village, and I'm trying to run it at least once a week throughout pretty much throughout the entire year, with a view to seeing how many species we've got. I've not yet been running for a full year, so I think we've got an empty window from now until the end of June, when I started last year. At that point, we'll have a reasonable picture of what we've seen in the village. I'm also just learning to go out and do sweeping for invertebrates and to beat for invertebrates from hedges and low trees. I'm very new to it, and for the moment I'm struggling a bit, but I'm starting to get there. And the other thing that 2 or 3 of us do in the village is we just go out with our cameras and we see what we can see, we take photographs, and then we sit down and try to identify. So we've got a good range of of methods that we're using to capture data. Once we've captured data, we need to think about how we're going to upload that onto iRecord. So our general rule is that anybody who wants to submit a record, if possible, should have a supporting picture or photograph. It doesn't have to be a great photograph, especially if it's something like a hedgehog or an easily distinguishable butterfly like an orange tip or a brimstone. As long as you can see what it is in the picture, then that's good enough. If we know what we're looking at, if we know, for instance, we've got a hedgehog, or we've got a roe deer, or we've got a chaffinch, or whatever, then that record will go straight onto iRecord. If we're not sure, then we have some validation techniques that we use. And the first thing that I use a lot is some of the great online resources, such as the Bees, Wasps and Ants Recording Society, British Bugs, UK Beetles, etc. There are various websites, pardon me, with great information that enables us to look at what we've photographed, try to identify it at least to genus level, if possible to species level. If we're confident with an identification at that point, then again, it goes to iRecord. If we're still not sure, then what we tend to do is post pictures and descriptions of what we've seen onto a number of really good Facebook groups. So I'm probably a member of about 20 different Facebook groups that help me to identify species. Just to name a few of them, there's a British Sawflies Facebook group, there's a Spiders Facebook group, there's a UK Moths Facebook group, and these groups tend to have, sitting there quietly in the background, a bunch of national, or in some cases international, experts, all of whom tend to be really helpful with their time and their expertise in terms of helping us to get things identified. And if we can't do an ID through either of those two means, we've even discovered some clever bits of artificial intelligence on the net. One thing that I've found really useful personally with my moth recording is this leps.fieldguide.ai app, which sits on my laptop. What it enables me to do is to post one of my photographs of a moth, and then it goes off and it compares to a library of moths and comes back with suggested IDs. And I found it to be over 99% accurate for macro moths that I've been struggling with over the last year. So these methods, basically, if we know what it is, straight to iRecord. If we're not sure, we go through these steps and then to iRecord, are basically enabling us to get our records up and get our records validated in hopefully in a timely fashion. So as we saw earlier on, we've set up an iRecord activity, which we find just a useful way of seeing who's recording what within the village. We're quite competitive, so we use the leaderboard thing in the iRecord activity to see who's recorded most things. When we're recording, we always try to use the species group forms if we can. But I must admit, we only really discovered the benefits of using these species group forms by accident. Had we known in advance how useful these were, we would have started using them right from the outset. But at least now that we are aware of them, we try to use them wherever we can. And I'll come back to discuss the importance of this for us a bit later on. I would say our overall experience with iRecord has been extremely positive. I certainly would class myself now as an iRecord addict. So whenever I'm out looking at things, taking photographs, the first thing I do when I get back is whack everything onto iRecord that I possibly can. If I can't put it on straight away, then I'm seeking IDs and putting them up later. One thing we do have a bit of a challenge with, however, is getting new users up and running. What we find a bit of is that people, they're confident with what they've seen. So they'll say, oh yes, I've seen an orange tip and I've got a photograph. But actually getting them to then adopt iRecord and go through the process of recording it has been a bit of a challenge for us. And we are looking for anything in terms of hints and tips to encourage people to do more in terms of recording. And we do find that in some cases, it takes ages to get records reviewed. Now, we know that's not a problem with iRecord, it's just the way that some recording groups are. So for instance, if I record a true bug, or if I record a moth, or if I record a hoverfly, I generally get an acknowledgement of that record, and the record will be verified within 2 or 3 days. If I record a spider, then generally speaking, it won't be verified at all. However, moving on, some of the records that we have submitted and that have been verified are giving us some interesting insights into what's happening in our local environment. So if we look up here at top right, this is a photograph of a willow emerald damselfly. This is a new species to the UK, only arrived in the UK I think in 2009, where it was first recorded in East Anglia. Since then, it's been rapidly spreading west and north. We recorded the first individual in September 2021. We saw just one of them, and it was the first record for our part of Oxfordshire. Last year, 2022, we recorded several. I think we recorded 5 or 6. It'll be very interesting to see how many we record this year, but I expect to see them as an abundant species locally this year. And that increase in abundance seems to pretty much match the northward and westward spread of the insect that we're able to monitor and track using iRecord. So I go onto the iRecord species page for that damselfly, and I can see how it's doing and how it's spreading. Top right here is a photograph of a bryony ladybird, which is a rare and local species, and that's here because this is one of the insects that was identified by one of our members who came to me and said, John, I've seen this ladybird. It doesn't look like a normal 7-spot ladybird. Can you come and have a look, see what you think it is? So we were delighted to get a record of this species for the first time last year in 2022. We've identified one little patch of bryony in the village where it seems to be doing really well. And we will now this year see if we can find the bryony ladybird in other areas in the village. Bottom left, this is another interesting record, again on bryony, of a solitary bee, the bryony mining bee, or Andrena florea. Again, a very local bee, dependent entirely upon white bryony for its existence. And the reason this record is on here, and the reason that iRecord has been really useful for this, is this bee was seen in August last year, in the middle of August. And all the information that we've been able to find says that the bryony bee is univoltine. It breeds, it's on the wing in May and early June, and by mid-June, it's pretty much finished and gone away. So we're thinking, was the very hot, dry summer last year responsible for a second brood of this bee appearing? If it was, will we be able to find second brood again when we get further hot, dry summers in future? So it's at the moment an interesting observation, but I think it's important that we try to track how the weather and how the climate is affecting what we see. And then lastly, over at bottom right, we have a tiny little snail, the de Moulin's wall snail, which is an inhabitant of clean, fresh water on calcareous soil. We found it in a piece of wetland by the River Thames. We were encouraged to go looking by somebody from the Environment Agency who told us that this species had been recorded in our area some 40 or 50 years ago, hadn't been recorded since. So we set out to go and have a look. Sure enough, we found it. So these are some of the early successes that we're having, and iRecord is just helping us in terms of tracking these, getting them logged, making the information available to a wider audience. The other thing that we're trying to do, as I alluded to, is start looking at species trends. So we're doing glowworm monitoring in the village, and over here we can see records for glowworms in 2021. We surveyed a particular area along the railway line, along a well-trodden and tightly rabbit-grazed footpath just to the south of the village, and also along a couple of roadside verges. And in 2021, we saw 19 glowworms on our survey night, and they were from 8 different 100-metre squares. Moving forward to last year, we had 32 glowworms on our recording night from 10 different squares. So an increase in range and an increase in abundance. Was that due to better weather last year? Was it due to other factors? We don't really know yet, but we're going to keep on monitoring and tracking. But one thing we did discover, which is a little bit, how could one put it, a little bit annoying for me personally, was we used 2 different recording methods over the 2 years. So in 2021, we used the glowworm species recording page, and in 2022, a different person recorded and used the iRecord app. And basically, using the glowworm recording page gives us an exact count of glowworms. Using the app gives us an exact count if it's 1, but then it goes 2 to 5 or 5 to 10. So we need to decide as a group which methodology we're going to use going forward and standardize on that. So that's a learning for us as we move forward. So what's next for us? As I've said, I want to start doing earliest and latest records for moth trapping. We're desperate to find an ornithologist in the village, because for a lot of people, wildlife means birds. More people are interested in birds, I think, locally than they are in woodlice or millipedes or spiders or whatever. So we're desperate to find an ornithologist to photograph and record for us. We'll continue to do our surveys and our activities. And just a little plug to our good friends at CEH, who've been very helpful to us already. We will shamelessly continue to exploit you for your skills and expertise and help in terms of getting us set up with new activities such as small mammal recording that we're hoping to start later this year. We're hoping to get involved in doing the UK pollinator scheme, which we think we can tag on to our wildflower walks. So onwards and upwards for us. So that's been a bit of a rush, but I think I've got through everything I wanted to say. So happy now if there's time to take any questions. So